Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of BookGoodies podcast, the author series. I'm Deborah Carney, your host, and with me I have author James today. How are you, James?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for taking time out of your night and for being flexible on recording time.
No problem, no problem.
It's been a hectic day. So, James, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your current project?
Sure, I'd love to. Well, again, thanks very much for having me and giving me the chance to talk a little bit about myself and hopefully give some tips on writing to your listeners as well. My name is James Tenedero. I'm an author based in Montreal, Canada. I've just completed my first full-length novel, which is entitled The Consistency of Parchment. In addition to that, I've done a lot of short stories, poetry, kind of dabbled in different genres. But as I said, this is my first kind of full-length fictional work, so I'm excited about seeing where it goes, and hopefully some of your readers will find it enjoyable and enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it. When I'm not writing, I'm actually pursuing my PhD. So I'm a PhD student in management at McGill University, finishing up my dissertation. Fingers crossed, should be finished by next summer. So when I'm not, I like to say when I'm not busy writing fiction, I'm busy writing nonfiction. But at some point, most of my day is somehow consumed with writing. So I guess I'm in the right profession somehow.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. Are you a work-at-home dad or no?
I'm not yet, but
Okay.
But no, I have an office at McGill, so I try to keep to a fairly normal workday schedule, if you like, and just kind of in early in the morning, out kind of, I guess, early evening, hopefully, and just try to structure my days around my time in the office.
Okay, that sounds like what a lot of our writers do. Is they keep writer. One of our authors, her tip for writers was to live like a writer. To live the writing life, which meant that you needed to write every day, whether you liked it or not.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It can be a bit of a struggle sometimes, but it's like any other kind of craft. If you don't practice it, I think you start to lose it. Your kind of writing muscles tend to atrophy a bit if you don't exercise them. So yeah, I think that's great advice.
So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your novel?
Sure, I'd love to. So again, it's titled The Consistency of Parchment.
Which I think is a fabulous title.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. It's I was a little bit on the fence about the title. I came up with the title fairly early in the process, and I had the sense maybe that it was a bit too cute, a bit too precious, but I think given the kind of themes that I cover in the novel, I think it's a bit apropos.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it just speaking generally, the genre or genres, I guess, that it would fall into are kind of literary fiction on the one hand and more action adventure, if you like, on the other. So I've really tried to craft something that I would see as fitting somehow in what I would consider the prototypical type of literary fiction work, very kind of strong narrative, deep character development, a certain kind of, maybe for lack of a better word, elegance in the prose itself. Mm-hmm. But then I've tried to kind of balance that a bit with a faster paced plot maybe than you would see in some of the more typical literary fiction type works. So again, it's I've kind of tried to write it the way that I like to read books, which is to have a very nice type of almost flowery style prose, but with enough kind of action and a fast-paced plot that really engages the reader to a certain extent. So I guess eventually my readers will hopefully decide to what extent I've succeeded, but that was kind of my intent as I wrote the book.
That sounds very interesting. I admitted to my last guest that I interviewed that I don't have much time to read, but you guys are all so engaging, and your books all sound so interesting. I might have to try and put aside some time for myself and do some reading in the fall and winter.
Sure. Yeah. No. Of course. Yeah. It's always hard to find the time, but yeah, it's hopefully a rewarding task when you actually do.
Yeah. Now tell us, you said you write short stories and some poetry. Are any of those published in a collection or anything, or?
Not at this point. I'm actually working, my next project is what I'm hoping will eventually coalesce into a collection of short stories based around the theme of, it's a fairly broad theme at this point, but it's really looking at personal loss and the way that, the kind of daily routines that we engage in as people, whether it's alone or kind of in our family lives, how those kind of counteract senses of personal loss as they're experienced in our lives. So the first short story that I've written in that vein is centered around a couple whose son has gone missing. And, of course, as a parent, you can imagine that's about the most terrible thing that could happen to you. But then as the days and the weeks and the months kind of go on, does some semblance of routine creep back into your daily lives? And how does that not compensate for the loss, but how do you kind of weigh that against the loss and the expectation that you will at some point overcome or surmount that loss? So I'm really kind of interested in playing with that theme of, the personal loss versus the kind of maybe the tendency to fall back into routine somehow, and how those two really completely different aspects of life play against each other. So it's I'm hoping to kind of craft a few stories that examine that theme from a few different perspectives, a few different circumstances.
That's very interesting. Are you using real people as examples, or are you news stories or people you know?
I think probably like a lot of the authors that you might have spoken to, and a lot of the stories that we hear about the writing process, it's probably a bit of a kind of compendium of news items that we would hear and that kind of resonate with us, and just the creative process at work, and kind of taking that as a jumping off point, but then kind of fictionalizing it to a certain extent. So I think it probably has some basis in real events, none in particular necessarily, but just maybe a kind of an amalgam of several different events, but then a fictionalized kind of turn to them as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting topic. That would be something that I would probably be interested in reading.
Great.
So you'll have to keep me posted.
I definitely will, yeah. And just to kind of, because I know that, I don't want to give the impression that I'm kind of taking this topic lightly, because it is something that, obviously for people who have experienced that type of loss, it's not something that I'm just kind of taking for granted and gratuitously, but I'm really interested in the way that fundamentally as people, we kind of deal with a lot of these expressions of loss, and how we kind of find the way to go on in our lives. So but
that's
I think
awesome.
it's a theme that's really,
you have to handle it very carefully.
Exactly, yeah, because you don't want to trivialize it, but at the same time, it's something that I think needs to be explored and needs to be examined. It's part of the human condition somehow.
Yeah, loss is something that everybody has to deal with at some point in their lives, unless they're extremely young when they are the one that is lost.
Exactly.
So, it's really funny because you're saying that you're going to have your PhD in what was it?
In management.
In management,
yes.
And yet you're a very creative person that's put out. You've got poetry and short stories and fiction. I have a friend who's very analytical, very business minded, very analyzes everything, and he posted that he put up his first Kindle book, and I'm like, oh, okay, you finally, you finished the book about analytics that you were going to work on, and da-da-da. It was a book of poetry.
Is that right?
I'm like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Where did this come from?
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of people out there that, and I think it's common among the entrepreneurial work-at-home folks, probably more than it is folks that work outside of the home, because you have more time to where your head is where you want it to be, not necessarily sitting in a meeting where you're not caring about what somebody's talking about. And we tend to, our brains work in a different way than other folks, and we all know writers' brains don't work the same as anybody else's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's interesting, because I think that there's it's kind of the it's become a bit cliche to talk about, the writers and how writers' minds are kind of so different and so non-analytical in a way, and the kind of the stereotype of the writer with the pages kind of strewn about the room and just digging through piles trying to kind of find something and having an idea and losing it and just completely harried and kind of trying to piece together things in that way. And I think that there's some truth to that, obviously, but I think that having what I would consider maybe to be a bit of an analytical mind, I think really helps me to structure my fictional writing in a way that helps me to advance the things in a way that maybe I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So I think that it's a bit of a fiction that the hardcore analytical side can't coexist somehow with the creative side. I think that you need a little bit of both, and as people, we're kind of nuanced that way. I think it's we do a disservice to writers when we kind of pigeonhole them a little bit, because there's room for that analytical side in the creative, and there's room for the creative in the analytical side. So I think it's kind of that's what makes us whole and interesting people.
And I couldn't have said that better myself. And the other thing I'm finding is that we're all pretty much control freaks, a little bit. Definitely. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of Type A personalities the last couple of weeks. And generally, those are the folks that are taking the publishing path that you're taking, which is to publish independently. What influenced your choice instead of trying to go the route of traditional publishing? Or did you try and then switch over to indie?
I did. I mean, I think that I did try the traditional publishing route. Like most aspiring authors, I probably harbored, the idea that somehow my novel would be discovered and I'd be, the toast of the town and, the next Jonathan Franzen or Cormac McCarthy or insert name of famous author here. So I did definitely start going out the traditional publishing route. And, I think that the nice thing about so many of the technologies that are advancing now and the internet and these online tools that we have to use as authors is that this kind of really privileged space that used to be occupied by the gatekeepers, whether it's the agents or the publishers, is really somehow being democratized a little. And, there have been people who have said it to in a much better way than I could. But I think that in the past, and this is certainly something I ran up to as well, is you would kind of query a literary agent or query a publisher. You would send a draft of a few papers in the mail and kind of sit twiddling your thumbs, waiting for 3 or 4 weeks for them to kind of deign to respond to you. And more often than not, it would be a response on the order of, this kind of looks interesting, but it's not exactly my cup of tea. Good luck with it elsewhere. And that can kind of wear you down a little bit. I mean, especially if you have a sense that what you're writing is, not necessarily perfect, but certainly has a home. And if you could get it in front of readers in some way that it would find a receptive audience. So all of that to say that I did kind of start with the traditional publishing route, but I found that it was a bit constraining. In a way. So, so I think that, when I started to learn a little bit about specifically the Kindle Publishing program and some of the ways that as an author I could take control of the process of publishing and then kind of use that to step into the marketing aspect and try to sell the book to the readers myself. You mentioned the control freak aspect, and that definitely appealed to the kind of control freak in me somehow, that, knowing that I would have control over how my book would be distributed, how I would be marketing it, who I would be targeting as readers, what I wanted to do in terms of marketing. I really kind of like that idea of being able to craft something from a creative aspect, and then, because I'm closest to it, obviously, and I have the most to gain from it finding an audience, then deciding how I'm going to publish it and how I'm going to market it. So again, all of that to say that I started with the more traditional publishing field, but it left me a little bit cold. And, I think that I'm happy with the process of being an indie author to this point, and I'm still kind of learning all the ropes, but I think it's a really interesting type of market and type of promotional approach to explore.
Well, and the other thing too is being, and I'm saying control freaks in a very loving way.
Of course, yeah.
You know, if you had been picked up by a traditional publisher, certain things would have happened that would not be within your control, including the distribution and the marketing. But even before that, they would dictate, you know, how they wanted your book to sound, you know, and they may even, I know one person that they bought the book and gave her an advance, and then they decided they wanted the entire book rewritten.
Right.
And she gave him back the advance and said, I wrote it once. I'm not writing it again.
Sure.
I'm not writing it just to a formula that you want me to stick to. This is how I want my story to be told. Mm-hmm. And also, you know, cover creation. You know, you probably worked with a designer, or, you know, if you're creative, you came up with your own cover. Mm-hmm. You know, when you work with a publishing house, again, you know, they're in charge, and they get final say. And I know people that were traditionally published that said, "Oh, don't even talk to me about the cover. I know it's horrible. Wasn't my idea." Really? You know, and now one interesting thing I would like to ask you, because I've gotten a lot of different answers to this question. A traditional publishing house would have had you get the book edited. Did you have an outside person edit your manuscript?
I didn't have an outside editor, but what I did, and you know, there are probably different schools of thought on this, obviously, but I'm a big proponent of this kind of desk drawer approach to editing, which is, you know, as a writer, what I like to do is finish writing my book with, you know, a fair bit of editing as I go, but, you know, trying to kind of maintain my voice and maintain my kind of momentum as I go. And with the finished product, just kind of set it aside and let it just kind of sit for a little while and give myself the chance to, you know, kind of gain a bit of distance from it. Because as a writer, obviously, when I'm writing it, I think it's the most fabulous prose that's ever been written. And, you know, I'm completely in awe of my own capabilities. But, you know, when you kind of set it in that desk drawer and leave it for a while and then come back to it 3-4 weeks later, even a few months later, which I did with the Consistency of Parchment, you kind of come back to it with a very different view. And I found that as an editor, I could come to it almost with less passion than I would have had, just knowing that it was my own work to edit right at this point. So I didn't use an outside editor, but I was very fastidious in terms of how I would edit it. I was very harsh in terms of how I edited and scenes that I would cut or reframe or add here and there. So I think that, again, I was happy with the process by which I edited the book, and again, that appealed a little bit to the control freak in me somehow as well, just knowing that I had a sense for how I wanted to edit and kind of carrying that through, and I think that it made the book as a finished product much stronger than it was initially.
Well, and that's really smart to, that's really important to point out to indie writers that, you know, I mean, you can finish a manuscript today and publish it within 24 hours.
Sure.
Now, should you do that? No.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, this is kind of the flip side of this democratization of publishing, is that anyone can do exactly as you said. I mean, you can finish writing a short story, a novel, a collection of stories today, and, you know, within 15 minutes, an hour, a couple hours, it can be up online ready for people to buy. But then the issue, of course, becomes that, you know, the one person who starts to read it knowing that it's independently published and maybe starts to say, oh, well, this is, you know, obviously a very amateurish work. And now all of a sudden all indie authors are somehow tarred with that brush of, well, it's, you know, it's not a professional edit. It's not a professional piece like I would find from a traditional publishing house. So you're right. I mean, it's a difficult type of balance because, you know, this is kind of a new enough forum, this indie publishing phenomenon, that people still don't know necessarily what to make of it. And the more of these kind of hastily crafted and very quickly published novels and books are out there, maybe the worse it is for those of us who do try to kind of craft it and make it into something that will really stand up to scrutiny. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I'm doing this series of podcasts and the interviews with authors that are in all stages. You know, some authors I'm talking to are already very successful. Some are in the middle. Some are just getting started out. And the consistency, the thing that is coming through consistently is that there is a lot of junk on the Kindle.
Sure.
You know, I've gone on the free days and I've gone on the not free days and I've looked inside. You know, we have that ability now at Amazon, which is wonderful, to look inside the book. I mean, you can't look as much as you can in a bookstore where you can flip through all the pages and randomly find a page to read. However, they are building that into some of the books where you can just say, you know, just give me a random page. But they have look inside the book so you can at least read the first part of a book. Yep. And if that first part of the book doesn't catch your interest, or you see errors, or you see inconsistencies, you're off the page and gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can return a Kindle book, which I have done.
Really?
I have actually, you know, even free books, because I didn't want them. I didn't want people thinking that I didn't want Amazon thinking that I downloaded this book and it was wonderful when I downloaded it and it was not so much.
Sure.
And I returned it even though it was free, just to kind of, you know, send a message that that's not, that there's something up with this. And also, you know, if I bought a book and I looked through it and, you know, there weren't inconsistencies in the beginning, but somewhere in the middle it lost me, you know, I've returned those as well. You've got 30 days. So, you know, you as the author need to understand that you don't want to put crap out there, because not only is it bad for you, it's bad for the industry.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I think you're absolutely right to do that. So I was kind of talking a little bit about the traditional publishing route, where you have the literary agents and the traditional publishers as gatekeepers. But now that there is so much more ability to bypass those kind of middlemen and you know, get your book or whatever is published right out there to the public, it really behooves us all, whether we're authors or casual readers or professional readers and reviewers, to kind of serve that gatekeeping function. Because if there's no kind of means of quality control out in the market, then it's hard to kind of sort the wheat from the chaff. So I think you're absolutely right to do that, and I think more readers and more reviewers probably should kind of take that very kind of harsh and skeptical look at books, even if they are free, because free doesn't necessarily mean high quality, of course. So it's again, it's difficult to know, because this industry is just kind of sorting itself out now. But it'll be It's a really interesting time, I think, to be a writer and a publisher, an indie publisher, an indie author, and we'll kind of see what the next few years bring.
I like the fact that you already have a collection of short stories and poems, even though you haven't published those, because I think that the Kindle and the e-reader and our where our society is right now is that they like little short glimpses. So I think that a book of short stories would be something that would be very successful, because, you know, we're sitting in the doctor's office, we're sitting in the car waiting for our kids to come out of soccer practice, or you know, we have all these times when we're just sitting and we have a slice of time and we don't have time to get into a whole big novel, but would be very satisfying to be able to read, you know, a short story in that time period, or read two or three. Yeah. So I think delivering things in smaller pieces to the public is one of the things that I've been encouraging people to deliver.
Yeah, that's I think it's great advice. You're right. Just those small pieces of time where we don't necessarily have the the cycles to get through War and Peace, but if there's a story by Chekhov that we could get through fairly easily, then I think it's kind of filling in those little gaps in time with small pieces of literature, and there's definitely an appetite for that, I think.
Yeah. And kids, too. I mean, they're sitting on the bus going to school. They're not talking to each other and throwing things around the bus anymore. They're all sitting there looking at their iPads or their telephones or whatever. And,
exactly.
Reading, kids are consuming everything electronically now. And they can read books on their phones.
Sure.
What was actually quite funny, I had a friend of mine relay a story that his kids had gone to bed a while ago, and he went upstairs and noticed a little light underneath his son's bedroom door. So he went in, and his son was, in bed with his iPad, and he was, his dad said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I was researching about the United States Constitution." And his father is like, "You are not." He goes, "No, really, Dad, I am." And he's, "Give me your iPad and, go to sleep." And he closes the door and he goes downstairs and he goes through the kid's history. And damned if he wasn't researching the U.S. Constitution. Right? Wow. And it was like a 12-year-old. And he's like, "I didn't know my kid did that. I thought he only played games on those things."
Yeah.
So even the young people that we think are taking our electronics for granted, they're actually using them for the same things that we used, regular books for as a kid,
Sure. Yeah.
I was one of those flashlight under the covers readers.
Yeah, definitely.
Go to bed and you read when you're supposed to be sleeping.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, I think that's the great thing, again, about some of the new technologies that are coming out, whether it's the Kindle or the iPad or, a lot of these e-readers that, it's giving younger readers especially the opportunity to kind of consume books in a different manner than maybe they would have before or would not have before. So I think this is a great opportunity, not only for us as authors, but also kind of as more broadly speaking as a society to kind of engage kids in great literature and in popular literature, and that's another reason why I think that it behooves us as readers and authors and reviewers to kind of make sure that there's enough good quality content out there, whether it's free or paid, because the last thing you want to do is sour a new reader on the experience of what could potentially be great literature. So it's, when you kind of think about all these things, it's a bit daunting to think of, what might really be at stake. I mean, you want to engage your readers, you want to make sure that they come back and that they're really kind of, that these stories are resonating with them. And, I think that to the extent that we do that, we all benefit much more, both as readers, as authors, and more broadly speaking, as society. I know it sounds very kind of highfalutin and idealistic, but that's always the way that I've kind of approached the writing craft, knowing that it's not just about the book itself, but it's about creating that type of conversation that hopefully a lot of people will want to engage in.
I couldn't have said that better. That's like excellent, because that's just the way it is you're creating you're not just putting something out there to make money, you're putting something out there to make a difference. When the person finishes your book, they know something that they didn't know. They feel something that they didn't feel. They understand something that they didn't understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
It expands their horizon. Now let's shift from what we had to do to get published. Now we're published. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, traditional publishers not doing so much of their own marketing anymore. What are some things you would recommend for our listeners to do from the marketing end, and what are some things that you're doing?
Sure. Well, I can say that you've spoken to quite a few authors already, I'm sure, and I'm sure I'll kind of end up parodying a lot of their advice. But I think more often that you hear some of these things, maybe the more it sinks in the value of these types of tools. But the first thing I would say is just the wealth of kind of these social and online social networking tools that are available to us as authors it's really a huge opportunity, and I think that I definitely try to make use of it as an author. So I have a Twitter account where I follow interesting authors. I tweet about whether it's free book giveaways or blog postings that I've written, try to kind of engage readers with the type of literature that I'm consuming and also the type of work that I've put out there as an author. So I have the Twitter feed that I maintain fairly religiously. I have a Facebook fan page that I'm kind of building up at this point. I have a writing-related blog on WordPress that I post to fairly often. And I have an account at GOODREADS, so trying to kind of link all these different things together and having another avenue to follow readers and see what they're reading and try to get them engaged and interested in my work. So a lot of what I do as an author from a marketing perspective is kind of through these online tools, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, blog postings, etc. And to see the number of authors using these same tools, it's obviously a fairly broad phenomenon at this point, but I think it's so valuable, and it's something that as an author you can do very easily at minimal expense, and it's just something that I can't imagine not doing as an indie author, especially since I don't have that big promotional push and marketing budget of a traditional publisher behind me the way that I would otherwise.
Now, you mentioned a lot of the social sites, and you mentioned a blog on WordPress. Do you have your own website or a website for the book where you're pushing some of that too?
I don't at this point. I think that probably what I'll end up doing, so what I've done on the blog is I've posted sample chapters, for example. I've kind of cross-linked a lot of the promotions, so if I have a free giveaway day on my Amazon account, then I'll blog about it, and I'll kind of list it in my Twitter feed as well. But I don't have a separate author website yet at this point, where I'm kind of developing things around the book itself. Mm-hmm. I think eventually I will get to that point. It's the last month or so since the book has been published has been a real learning experience for me. Just, I was familiar, of course, with Facebook and Twitter and some of these other tools, but just to use it not just as kind of somehow a disinterested user, but as an author promoting his books was kind of a bit of a different mindset to switch into. So mm-hmm. I think that now that I've become a bit more familiar with how to use these tools from a promotional perspective, now I'll also look at things like developing my own website and kind of feeding content from the book in there, and trying to leverage some of these tools from more of a marketing perspective.
That's a great idea. So let's talk a little bit about GoodReads, because a lot of people are using it, and I haven't asked too many people yet. How are you actually using GoodReads, and do you think it's bringing you sales?
Mm-hmm. I can't speak too much to the sales aspect, just because it's only fairly recently that I've set up my GoodReads account. But what I can say that it has been very useful so far for me to this point is in engaging, especially bloggers who might be interested in the book, in the consistency of parchment. So what I've done through my GoodReads account is posted an event where I've given a quick blurb about myself, about the book. I've included links to my Twitter account, to my Amazon page, to all the different kind of social networking tools, and so what I'm doing now is trying to arrange a blog tour for the book, and I've created an event where I'm inviting bloggers who are interested in hosting me, whether it's as a guest host, having some kind of cover reveal, for example, doing a review of the book, asking whoever would be interested to contact me and try to help me get engaged with the blog tour itself. So there's been some good response on that so far, I have to say. So on GoodReads, what I found has been useful is, again, really engaging people who are interested in reading, who are interested in supporting independent authors, who have blog sites of their own and are looking for content, and who are interested in helping to support a new and aspiring author. So I think from my perspective, at least at this early stage, that's where GoodReads has been very useful for me, just as another kind of networking tool to try to kind of gain engagement and promotion for the book itself.
All right, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because I haven't used, I don't know if I said it or not, I haven't used GoodReads that much. I've used it for a couple of giveaways, and I seem to get a little lift and probably a few sales from it, but I don't know. I only recently set up my blog. I actually have BookGoodies, all these podcasts now feeding into my GoodReads account, so hopefully people will find, on the GoodReads blog, they'll find their way back to the BookGoodies blog. Yeah,
exactly. And it's funny now because you can spend so much time, and I certainly have probably spent too much time kind of trying to learn how all these tools work, and how you can kind of set up whether it's your Twitter feed or your blog account to link back to Goodreads and vice versa. And, it can kind of tie your head in knots a little bit trying to figure out, is it best to maintain just the kind of short bursts on Twitter? Is it best to kind of have the content on Facebook? Do you want to have the Goodreads account that kind of manages all of these different things? So, I think that every author is kind of experimenting a little and trying to see what works best. But, that's part of the fun too, just kind of the trial and error aspect of it, seeing what really tends to, as you said, create a bit of a jump in sales, and what, if you try it, doesn't really seem to have much of an effect. So it's an interesting process to go through as an author, because then you switch from the creative side to the really kind of cold analytical side again as the marketer and the promoter, and trying to measure your metrics and look at how many click-throughs am I getting here, how much engagement am I getting. So it's it's a different world from the world of writing, but it's something that you have to do as an indie author, of course.
Yeah, I had a really good month in April because I had done a lot of promotion in March, and then in May and June I was busy with a lot of traveling, and I didn't do hardly any book promotion of my own, and my sales showed it.
Really? Yeah.
There's still sales, but there's not the level of sales that I was getting when I worked really hard on pushing out to bloggers and, trying to get the word out to different people. So,
sure.
And do you have any marketing plan, or are you like the rest of us where you're just like throwing things out there and seeing what works the best?
Yeah, I'd say that I didn't start with any kind of finely calibrated plan. It was more just, okay, well, I see that some of the authors that seem to be selling well are doing this, so let me try to mimic them a little bit and see if I can get a similar level of engagement doing this. Oh, okay, this seems to work well, maybe I'll try this as well. So it was, I have to admit, a little bit scattershot at the beginning, but now that I've become a bit more conversant and a bit more familiar with some of the tools, I still definitely wouldn't say that I have anything approaching a very sophisticated integrated marketing plan, but I think I have figured out some things that do tend to work a little bit better than others. So I'm trying to focus what fairly limited time I have to try to really drive those specific tools.
Do you have your book both? I'm sorry if you said this earlier. I may have missed it.
Okay.
Is your book both on Kindle and on CreateSpace or other print on demand, or is it only available in one version or the other?
No, at this point it's solely available on Kindle,
Okay.
and that's, again, that was kind of a conscious choice that I made at this point, just to, I really wanted to kind of see what type of engagement, what type of sales I would get just through Kindle itself. And if it comes, if the day comes where I feel it's not really gaining the level of attention that maybe I think it could otherwise, then I'll probably look to other sites, other tools, other ways to publish. But at this point it's really just through Kindle itself that it's available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's really awesome. Do you have any parting thoughts that you would share with our listeners?
Well, I guess just to kind of reiterate what we've been talking about. If for the indie authors out there, it can seem a little bit daunting at first, and I certainly felt this way when you first publish your book and you kind of try to figure out how you're going to cut through this thicket of information and try to get your work noticed. But it's like anything else. If you just kind of keep at it and you go about it honestly and you kind of try to engage honestly with other writers and readers, then I think that you can't help but achieve a certain level of success. So yeah, for the writers out there, I would just encourage them to to continue promoting their books and continue, of course, writing good books. And for the readers out there, first of all, I would hope that they take a look at my book specifically, but also support independent authors as well, and where you see well-published and well-crafted and well-written independent fiction, I think it's important not only to support it through sales, but also to try to get the word out. Review on Amazon, link through GoodReads, tweet about your favorite authors, your independent authors, and just, again, try to kind of drive more success for independent authors, because I think that, there's a lot of great independently published work out there that maybe doesn't get quite as much attention as maybe it could or should. So hopefully readers will include the consistency of Parchment in that category. But more broadly speaking, I would hope that they would support independent authors and take a look at what's being published out there, because there's a lot of really, really great stuff out there.
That's perfect. And I can't agree with you more on every point. So James, tell us where people can find you on Twitter and Facebook and WordPress.com.
On Twitter, my Twitter account is James Tenedero, so JamesTenedero. On WordPress, you can find my blog. It's called Life Examined. So it's WordPress.com. I guess if you do a search for James Tenedero, it should come up. But yeah, it's basically postings, ruminations on writing, on the writer's life, on the PhD student's life, on how you kind of keep all these things in play and balanced, or sometimes fail to. So
the juggling act.
Exactly, yeah. So hopefully, again, both readers and writers will find something that resonates for them on the blog. On Facebook, you can search for James Tenedero. I think the actual Facebook page is Tenedero James on Facebook.
Okay.
And then on Amazon, you can find, if you do a search for The Consistency of Parchment or for the author James Tenedero, you should find my author page, and you should be able to click through to a purchase for the book itself. So, again, I would hope that some of the readers who are interested in whether it's literary fiction or kind of more fast-paced adventure-type fictional work will take a chance on The Consistency of Parchment.
Awesome. And the reason I asked for all those is because a lot of people hear us on iTunes and on other podcatchers, and they didn't necessarily find us through the BookGoodies site.
Right.
So I like to be able to, have you tell them where to find you. And then, of course, listeners, we would invite you to come over to BookGoodies.com, BookGoodies.com, and you can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/BookGoodies, and Facebook.com/BookGoodies. We would love for you to come over and comment on the podcast. You can also use our contact form to offer to be a guest. And if you're an author, you can submit your book information and your Kindle free days if you happen to be using KDP Select. So we have a lot of options for authors to get exposure, because we totally want to support all authors, but especially give the indie authors a voice. Again, we'd like to thank Geekcast.fm for hosting our podcast and for hosting other podcasts about internet marketing and affiliate marketing and all kinds of other marketing, online marketing. And you can find me at twitter.com/LOXLY, twitter.com/Loxley, like in Robin Hood, Robin of Loxley. And you can find me at DeborahCarney.com. So I want to thank everybody for listening. James, thank you again for taking time out of your day.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for this service. This is a great service, again, for readers and writers alike. So thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And as always, I want to tell you guys to have a great day and keep on writing. And thanks for listening.